It is with honor that I can introduce our guest speaker today, Rabbi Phil Cohen of Temple Beth-El. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Excuse me. Oh, beg your pardon. So thank you for this opportunity. I understand this is the second in this series that you've put together. I'll tell you what I understand the assignment to have been, which is I've got 15 minutes to present the basics of a 3,000-year-old tradition. Now Gary, and then we're going to have some back and forth. Gary said that 15 minutes is flexible, but I won't. I'll try my best not to abuse it. I'll keep an eye on the clock, and then I'm happy to take your questions either about what it is I speak about, or any other questions about the Jewish tradition that you might have. I know a little bit about everything and a lot about very little, but any question you might have, I'll do my best to answer. So what I've done is something that I like to do in various permutations and combinations. I thought about 10 points of 10 major points of the Jewish tradition, or a quick history of the Jewish tradition. But what I did instead was I collected 5 biblical texts, 4 from the Torah and 1 from the first book of Kings, that are particularly, you might say, pungent theologically. They're particularly deep in meaning. And what I'll do is I'm going to go through each of those texts, keeping an eye on the clock. I may or may not get to all 5. And one reason I thought that this would be useful is, first of all, it's the Bible. It's that book that Jews consider to be sacred scripture, as well as the Christian world. And so a lot of you are going to be familiar with a lot of the texts that I'm bringing up, but still, I think I may have something to say. I may have an angle on it that might be new. So, like I said, I'll keep an eye on the clock, and and I have the texts. I've been made co-hosts, so let's bring it up. Okay. All right. So. Now, if I was on my other computer, I would know how to enlarge the font. I don't see how to do it on this one. I hope it's legible enough. So the first is the very end of the first book of Genesis, which teaches what I think is I would say it's the prime dogma of the Jewish tradition. And if you haven't already considered this text previously, you'll know what I mean. So I'll read the Hebrew and then the English, and then I'll take a minute and explain what I think is some of the depth of meaning of this thing. So Vayomer, this is the last day of creation, day number 6. Vayomer Elohim na'aseh adam b'tzalmenu ki demotenu v'yirdu v'gdat hayam Uva'of ubehema v'chol haaretz v'chol haremes haromes al haaretz. Now, part of this is controversial, and I'm not going to enter into it too deeply. I'm really interested in the very first point. God says, "Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle of the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth." So the controversial part, which I'm just going to mention quickly in passing, is the second part, because when, going back to, I think, the 1960s or so, religious voices in America began talking about environmentalism, some people were quick to blame this text for a general permissiveness in Western civilization to destroy the earth. Like I say, that's controversial. I want to focus on the first part instead. Note that what God is quoted as saying is, "Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness," and that's a kind of a duplication. That's essentially a parallelism. And when you get a parallel text in Hebrew literature, it's intended to be emphatic. And so this is a statement. It's a very quick statement. It doesn't get unpacked philosophically. The Bible, for the most part, isn't a philosophical document. It has some philosophical elements to it, but it's not philosophy. But it's saying we human beings are really, really, truly somehow, however you conceive it, constructed out of the divine image. When I introduce this text, especially to kids, and I say to them, what does this mean? They're going to want to talk about some physical resemblance between us and God. And, how can we say we look like God because, God doesn't have a body? There's something different in this. There's something, it says that there is something essential that human beings share in common. 100% of humanity shares this divine likeness in common. And therefore we are distinguished from the rest of animal kind, and I don't want to get into that discussion either. I was in a comparative religion class once, and we were studying this text, and somebody wanted, legitimately so, to argue about the sentience of non-human beings. For the moment, let's accept this, that human beings are distinguished from all other being in the world by being made in the divine image. And like I say, this means that we have something in common. So horizontally, this text is teaching us that every human being, regardless of those various things by which we distinguish each other, gender, sexual orientation, nation, ethnicity, race, although we don't use that word anymore, regardless of how we look to each other, and all you got to do is look at this group and see how different we are. Regardless, there's something important. There's something ontologically critical in our being. That's the horizontal part. The vertical part means that however we're going to understand this thing that's part of us, we have something in common with God. And what I teach is that thing in common we have is in potential. It's potential, not necessarily actual, but we can actualize it. We have that potential to actualize whatever it is we have in common with God. And so it's a universalistic statement, right at the very beginning of the Hebrew Bible. Now, chapter 12 comes along, and Abraham enters the scene, and the objects or the subjects of the Bible then become the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jewish people, and there's very little focus through the rest of the Hebrew Bible on any other people than that, except for the prophet Balaam and his folks, and the book of Job, which Job's not a Jewish guy. But nevertheless, it's saying that ultimately, something critical. There's something critical that we share among us and between us and God. So that's one element. So the next is the story where God tells Abraham God's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham begins to argue with God, creating one of the longest dialogues in the Hebrew Bible. And if you're not familiar with the story, it's really quite delightful. Chalila lecha ma'aseh hadavar hazeh lehamit tzadik im harasha v'hayak tzadik karasha chalalala. Hashofet kol haaretz ya'aseh mishpat. And so Abraham says to God, in disputing whether it's a just act destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham says, what if there are 10 righteous people, 9 righteous people, 8, 50, I beg your pardon. It starts at 50, and the bargaining goes down to 10. And God agrees if there are 10 righteous people, God will not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, so we're left with the conclusion that there aren't even 10 righteous people. But Abraham says to God, far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that the innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? So there are at least 2 elements in this quote that I like. One, of course, is in this relationship between Abraham and God, this friendship between Abraham and God, which is mostly a friendship, except that little thing in, I think it's chapter 22, where God says, go take Isaac and do him in. Except for that little moment, there's a kind of a relationship that becomes a friendship. Not like the friendship God and Moses have. That's a real friendship. But Abraham is saying to God, I know you by your justice. You're a just God, and How dare you, as a God of justice, consider this kind of destruction that will destroy innocent along with guilty? Of course, it assumes that it's okay to destroy the guilty. That's another conversation one could have at a later time. And so it tells us, and it's kind of, I didn't pick this text because it relates to the first one, but I think it does have a kind of a relationship to the first one, because Abraham is saying to God, you're a just God, and I'm reminding you of that. And in my reminding you of that, you cannot perpetrate this act that's unjust. But second, Abraham is telling God, and the author is telling us, that we, being created in the divine image, need to understand the importance of justice, and we can learn from God as our ideal type what it means to be a just person, what it means to be a just community, a just nation, a just world. And there's the rhetorical nature of this question, of course, to which the answer is obviously no. I will not. If there's a huge preponderance of innocence and very few guilty, I'm not going to do this act of destruction. So, and in case you needed a reminder about the story, Abraham is able to get God to agree to if 10 righteous people exist in Sodom and Gomorrah, the Lord of all the earth, will not destroy them. But he does. God does. Okay, so this is the beginning of the Jewish version of the Ten Commandments. If I didn't double check this, but if I remember correctly, this preamble is not part of what you find in the Catholic or the Protestant Bible. In the Q&A, if I got that wrong, you can correct me. So, Vayedaber Elohim ekol hadavarim ha'ele lemor, Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. God spoke all of these words. Moses is halfway up on Mount Sinai, and God is booming with a big, loud voice. It scares the heck out of the people, and they don't allow God to continue after the 10 Commandments are delivered. And he says, "I am Yahweh." It says here, "I am Adonai. I'm the eternal your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage." And true enough, in the chronology of the book of Exodus, it was just 3 months before that the Israelites were an enslaved people. And God, of course, first sent Moses, and Moses and Aaron, and then God sent 10 plagues. And because of the horror of the 10th plague, the slaying of the firstborn, Pharaoh immediately says, "Get out of here, go." And then they're gone, and Pharaoh changes his mind and says, "What did I do?" And he sends his army, 450 chariots and RPGs and all kinds of helicopters and jet planes. And God splits the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. The Israelites go on the other side, and the Egyptians are drowned. What I always say that God is doing here is telling us, and I teach this every year at Passover, and especially Pesach, God is saying, "Look, you guys, just 3 months ago you were slaves, and according to various numbers given in the tradition, you were slaves for 400 years, you were slaves for 200 years, and I, the eternal God, the ruler of heaven and earth, I, with a little bit of help from Moses and Aaron, freed you. I brought you out of the house of bondage. Don't ever forget that." And I think the Jews, at least in terms of our collective consciousness and the way we educate ourselves, we've never forgotten that once we were slaves. And what's the importance of that? Well, probably a lot of different things, because and I can tell because the Jewish tradition developed an 8-day holiday to celebrate this liberation from slavery. I just took a quick look at the time, because I don't want to totally overstay my welcome here. And so if you people are going to be a moral people, and your people are going to be enthralled to me, the eternal God, the only being you have any right to be enthralled to, you need to always have in mind that you were once slaves, and because of that, you will have, if you don't forget, an intuitive reaction to injustice. primarily to slavery, but not just slavery, but all forms of injustice. And so I teach that that this knowledge, this what God is telling us, makes us an ethical people. Other peoples are ethical people as well, no doubt. But the intensity of our morality is heightened extensively because of our slave experience. And so the rest of the Ten Commandments are, Shabbat, the Sabbath and murder and adultery. Don't do murder and adultery. Don't do robbery. But you do all of that out of the matrix of the memory that you will never forget that you were once slaves. So that's the third text. I'll do at least one more, and I'll take a look at the clock. This is one of my favorites. All right, so this is the time after the golden calf incident, when they've destroyed the golden calf, and order has been restored among the Israelites, and God and Moses are having a chat. The chat itself, the full extent of the chat, is very interesting, but I'm just gonna talk about this one moment. Whenever I teach this text, I always remember that TV show with William Shatner, and I forget the guy he co-starred with. At the end of every show, they're up on the roof of their law firm, and they're having a cigar and a shot of scotch. I always think about God and Moses having a cigar and a scotch right now. They're friends again, and they're equals. Now you'll see that they're not exactly equals, but they're pretty equals. They're pretty much equals. And in the midst of this, all of the troubles have been handled, and they're just the two of them alone. Moses says to God, "Vayomer hareini na et kivodecha." God says, and Moses says rather, "Let me behold your presence." Now the word kavod, the Hebrew shorish, the Hebrew root kavad, K-V-D, means honor, means respect. It also means liver, kaved. I think it's kaved, yeah, is liver in modern Hebrew. That's because in antiquity, the liver of the person was seen as the source of that person's essence. But God says, "Vayomer lo tuchal lirot et panai ki lo yar'eni ha'adam v'chai." But God says, did I skip something here? God says, "I will make all my good." I skipped the line here. I'm sorry. Vayomer ani avir et tuvi kol panecha v'karati v'shem Adonai lefanecha v'chanoti et asher achon v'rachamti et asher arachem. God says, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name Yahweh, and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. But you cannot see my face, for a human being may not see me and live." And God said, "See, there is a place near me. Station yourself on the rock." And lo, God passed by. What did I list? And sorry, I beg your pardon. "And as my presence passed by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock." Let's see, I got to make you disappear. "I will place you in a cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by." So I always see, this force picking Moses up and putting him in the cleft of a rock so that he's in rock up to his neck, from his back to his front, and somehow God passes by, and Moses sees God's back. Now, interestingly, just as a quick aside, the narrative doesn't actually tell you this. It moves on to the next part of the story. So you're left to imagine, the reader is left to imagine what actually happens. So there are two parts to this that I really like. One, whatever it means, whatever the author had in mind, God is saying, if you were to see the totality of me, the power of it will be so strong that it's going to just kill you. You cannot tolerate seeing the totality of me. But I can let you see my back. and I'm going to protect you from seeing my face by putting you in the cleft of this rock, and you can see my back. So I always have two images in my head. One, even though we're not supposed to image God, I see this creature kind of like the Hulk from the comic books, or the Thing from the comic books. See this big, huge back, but not the face. So I see the back, but I also see motion. I see this being in motion. And so God, so what the author is telling us, or what I get from this text, is, all right, we can't see God's face. That's too powerful for us. We're human and God is not. So in terms of us being created in the divine image, not totally so. But we can see God's back. We can see God moving, and we can follow God. And this kind of gets back to, maybe it's more than, but it gets back to that Abraham text from a minute ago. Namely, we can follow after God, and in following after God, we can learn what we can learn about God and bring that and manifest that into the world. We want to talk about justice. We want to talk about kindness. We want to talk about the life of the Spirit. We want to talk about community. All of those values which we, of all religions, believe in or understand or like to manifest in the world, all of those are things that we can learn from God, learn from God's back. We can't learn the totality of that, and we can't see the totality of God, but we can follow after God throughout our lives on this planet. So those are. I'm going to skip the last one because I think I've gone well past the 15 minutes I was given. So it's divine likeness, it's justice, it's the meaning, it's a particular meaning of ethics for those who follow this preamble to the Ten Commandments if you're not Jewish, or this is part of the Ten Commandments if you are. And we can learn God from God's back, but we can't see God's face and live. We can't see God's face, it would kill us. So I think I'm going to stop there. I actually did more than I thought I would. And Q&A about that, or anything else that you care to bring up.
This theme of that we can't look at God's face is, there you could talk a lot, discuss a lot on that subject. I've heard the analogy that comparing God to the sun, which is very common in general in discussion, and that you can't look at the sun, even for a moment. You can't look directly at the sun.
That's a nice.
And yet it's the source of all life and energy. And we essentially receive God, you might say, at our back, in a sense, or the sun, the power of the sun we receive indirectly. And it's what gives us life, actually, in the physical sense. So it's it dovetails that idea very nicely with this quotation that you shared.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure I've ever heard that analogy before. I mean, you can do a lot with it. Like you can use God as sun for energy. Make godly energy, solar energy. Do a lot with that. So thanks for bringing that up.
I have a question to you personally, which is, why did you decide to become a rabbi?
That's a very long answer. The short of it is, 1974, I found myself in a yeshiva in Jerusalem. Yeshiva is where Orthodox people go to study Judaism, and I came to that experience with very little Jewish background, less than most, and it challenged me. It was also at a point in my life I graduated college, not having been a terribly good college student. I had no professional ambitions at the time. I probably would have worked toward getting into law school, making arguments about the law instead of about Judaism, and that's what. And so, looking at my opportunities to learn more, rabbinical school. This is going to be very utilitarian. Rabbinical school seemed like the best place to go to get a Jewish education, and at the same time have a profession at the end of it Going into rabbinical school, I wasn't sure how I would practice that profession, and I've done a lot of different things. I was a college teacher. I was a Jewish high. I was a high school teacher in a Jewish high school. I was on Hillel. I was on campus at Michigan State University. But I guess the largest number of years I've spent is in the pulpit. So that's the short answer.
Thank
The longer answer you have to read when my memoir comes out. Whenever that.
Okay.
I have to start it before it can come out, but there'll be a lot.
Okay, thank you.
I put my hand up. I'm going to jump right in here with a question. And thank you for presenting this today. This is the first real intro I've had about Jewish faith. So Raphael, thank you. When you brought in Genesis 1, right off the bat, let us make humankind in our image, you can see my frame. I'm very much for accepting of all versions of person. And so when it says our image and not his image, her image, my image, and then followed up with Exodus 33 being, if you saw me, it's too much for you to take and it will destroy you. That leads me also, that kind of lends to me to being, it's more than what our brains can really absorb. So why would we put in a box that Yahweh, God, Goddess, are this defined image? We can't define it. So that's why I'm like, okay, the words of Torah say, let us make humankind in our image. Whereas I've always been taught from the Christian past, my Christian past, God made us in his image, specifically and limited. And it kind of kicks out all us chicks and all us non-binary or transgender people, two-spirit people, intersex people. It's like, this brings us back into the fold. Thank you very much. So I'd appreciate your thoughts or how you manage that particular phrasing. Let us make humankind in our image. And seeing my face would then be destructive to you as a human. You couldn't handle it.
Yeah. So I have two quick responses. One is, as I said, the universality of that statement. It's unmistakable, and a lot of people, especially within the Jewish world, say Judaism doesn't have dogmas, and if you talk about a dogma like if I got my language right, a Catholic catechism, we don't have dogmas that we make our people recite at significant moments in their lives, but we do have dogmas, things that, in my view, are inextricable from an understanding of the Jewish tradition. One of them is being created in the divine image. And so even if it took more than a couple of millennia to get to a point where some of us anyway are willing to say all human beings, regardless of their various orientations, are created in the divine image, it took us a long time to get there. And of course, we're still not there totally. It's there. It's there at the root of the Jewish tradition. Now, I don't think you're saying otherwise, but just in case, this let us make, and of course it's not Adam b'Tzalmenu, the proper translation, if you're going to, is man. Let us make man in our image, but the translation that I'm using decided to make it humankind, and I have no problem with that. But that's that's the end of the book. That's at the end of everybody's book of Genesis. Right? There's not, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of the name of a Christian translation, but I can't. Well, King James. It's in the King James version. It's in the Jewish version. It's not different. But it took us a long time to get to the point where we don't say we are created in His image, and of course that's still something that we talk about. That's an orientation that not everybody shares. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
I also, Lynn, I want to thank you for bringing up that, because I have my husband, we have a particular interest in the LGBT community, in regards to religious faiths. And I mean, and I thank the rabbi too for using the word humankind. That shows a great elevation of thinking. I appreciate it.
Can I ask a practical question? I've read in the New York Times, and I guess there may be other sources too, that say that membership in various faith groups around the country is declining. And what do you experience here at Temple Bethel or in the Jewish faith in the States in general, if you happen to know? Because I think the reason is that the congregations are aging out, and there aren't young people coming in to replace them often. Are you seeing the same thing in the temple, in the Jewish faith?
There's a general rule of sociology that I think applies to most groups within most minority groups within a larger society. I mean, there may be some groups that are particularly well insulated from the larger society, but even those groups can't avoid the influence of the larger society. So we're go with society, so go with the Jews. I'm in this career path of the interim clergy, interim rabbi, and I was in Allentown, Pennsylvania for the last year. Nice congregation called Knesset Israel, which had around 300 units. We count our membership by units. So a unit could be 1, it could be 15. And they had to fill out a form when they were deciding to look for their next settled rabbi. And part of the form asks for the demographics. So I looked and I saw 70% of that congregation was over 70, which means, of course, 30% was under. And they had a religious school, which is another way of kind of understanding the demographics of a congregation, had under 25 kids. So here in Riverside, at Temple Bethel, we have about somewhere around 180 families, 180 units, and 18 kids in our religious school. So that gives you a hint as to the demographics. And in point of fact, in spite of that sociological rule I cited a second ago, we may be slightly ahead of the curve on this one. Unfortunately, we're an aging community. We're not dying. I'd like to come back in 50 years and see numerically where we are, but it's. I mean, what you point out is true. Aging and the Jewish community has been doing demographic surveys of itself about every 10 years since 1990. And those numbers indicate a decline among the Jewish community in religious identification, a significant decline. So we're in the same boat as you guys in that regard, or as in most religions in this country.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone, but we're going to have to take a little bit of time for a meeting. We do want to ask if you have any questions you feel you really need to ask. Go ahead, and this will be the last questions. If not, we'll move forward.
I have a question for the rabbi. Rabbi, when you talked of your story, you had God talking directly to, I forgot the gentleman's name. Does God often speak to people directly in that sense?
Do you mean like in real life?
Throughout the Bible.
Well, the Bible, yeah. God's a chatty guy. Yeah, God's a chatty person. God talks. I mean,
is he mostly talking to people, or is he sending messengers to talk for you?
No. I mean, God sends messengers, as in the. I'm not sure if the number is 5. I think God sends 5 messengers who are angels to talk to Abraham and Sarah to tell them that Sarah's going to have a baby. So there are instances of that in the Bible, but God does a lot of talking. I mean, look at the book. If you look at the book of Oh, geez. Well, you look at, the other book will pop into my head. You look at the book of Jonah, God talks to Jonah, several times in this story. If you look at Jeremiah, a lot of the book of Jeremiah, among other prophetic books, is quoting God, speaking to Jeremiah. So yeah, in the Hebrew Bible, God chats a lot. I thought you were asking me a different question, which in the Jewish world, if we, I mean, I understand in elements of the Protestant world, this thing is different. Some Protestant groups understand that God does speak directly to them. If that happened in the Jewish world, that person would be sent first to a therapist, after which that person's fate would. We don't talk about God speaking directly to these things.
Right.
Phil Cone, Rabbi Phil Cone, thank you so much for this enlightenment you shared with us and your time as well. But feel free, we host our meetings once a month at 1 o'clock, and welcome everyone to join and attend. And every quarter, we'll try to find different speakers to give us some understanding of their faith. First person was Gary, who graciously told us about the Wiccan tradition. And our second person is Phil Cone, who's enlightened us about the Jewish traditions and culture. So once again, I'd like to thank you again. I'm sorry, Zubair, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm new here, and I feel like people don't know me, and I did not introduce myself. I wanted just them to know me. My name is Zubair Mokubiye. I work with the ICUC as the community/theology organizer for Riverside, but also I'm